Diane's busy, maybe call next week. That was the text I got from my son-in-law on Father's Day. 6 words, no period, sent from Brent's phone, not Diane's. I was in the backyard when it came through, down on one knee next to a rotted fence post I'd been meaning to replace for 2 weeks, work gloves on, post digger, lying in the dirt beside me. I pulled off one glove, checked the screen, read it twice, then I put the phone back on top of the toolbox, pulled the glove back on, and went back to the fence post. I finished the post, tamped the concrete, put the tools away, then I went inside and reheated a pork chop from the night before. Ate it alone on the back porch while the sun went down over the neighbor's roofline. Didn't call anybody, didn't text back. Just sat there until it got dark and the June air finally started to cool off. My name is Martin Kowalski. I'm 59 years old. I spent 31 years in construction, commercial builds, mostly across Denver and the surrounding counties. I lost my wife Karen to cancer 8 years ago. After that, it was just me and Diane. I thought that was enough. I thought we were solid. Turns out I was wrong about that. I want to be straight with you before I go any further. I'm not the kind of man who rattles easily. I've run job sites with 40 guys, handled city inspectors who wanted everything torn out and redone, dealt with subcontractors who took half the deposit and disappeared. I know how to stay level when things go sideways. But that text sat with me all day and into the next day, and for most of the week after that, because it wasn't the first time. There was the Thanksgiving 2 years earlier where I drove 40 minutes to their house in Arvada and got a call from Diane when I was already in their parking lot. Her voice was tight, apologetic. Brent's parents had shown up unannounced. She said, "No room. So sorry, Dad." I sat in my truck for a few minutes before I turned around and drove home. Ate a frozen meal that night and watched the game by myself. There was Perry's 6th birthday party. I showed up with a present, a good one, a wooden building set I'd spent actual time picking out, and Brent answered the door. He didn't say anything rude, he didn't have to. His face said it, not angry, just flat, like I was a delivery he hadn't ordered and wasn't sure he wanted to sign for. He let me in. I stayed 45 minutes, watched Perry open gifts, gave him a hug, and left before dinner. There was the Christmas call where I could hear Brent's voice in the background the entire time, and Diane kept cutting her sentences short. She was off the phone in under 4 minutes. Every time I told myself it was a rough patch, that Brent was just wired differently than me and I needed to be patient, that things would smooth out once they got more settled. Sitting on that back porch on Father's Day evening with my pork chop going cold, I stopped telling myself that. Something in that marriage was wrong. Not rough patch wrong. Something structural. And I was being pushed out of my daughter's life because of it, quietly, steadily, in ways that were hard to name but easy to feel. I didn't do anything about it that night. I just sat there until it got too dark to see the yard, then went inside and went to bed. About 3 weeks later, I walked into Patty's Diner on Colfax for breakfast. I'd been going there most mornings since I retired. It's one of those places that hasn't changed since 1987. Same orange vinyl stools at the counter. Same laminated menus with the coffee rings worn into the corners. Same woman named Sandy who's been refilling cups there since before I had gray hair. Real eggs. Cheap coffee. Nobody asks you anything. That particular morning, every stool at the counter was taken. I grabbed a booth near the front window, the one that looks out onto Colfax and catches the morning light. There was a couple in the booth right behind me, older, mid-60s, looked like they'd been coming there a long time. The man leaned over the partition and said, "We've got room on this side if you'd rather not sit alone." I almost said no. My instinct was to say I was fine, thanks anyway. Instead, I said, "Sure, appreciate it." His name was Glenn Harmon. His wife was Norma. Glenn had spent 35 years as an accountant, ran his own small firm for the last 12, mostly small businesses and contractors around the Denver metro. Norma had taught middle school English for 28 years. They had 3 kids and 6 grandkids, and they'd been coming to Patty's every Saturday morning for over a decade. "It's the one thing on the calendar," Norma said, stirring her coffee, "that neither of us has ever canceled." We talked for almost 2 hours. The food was long gone, and Sandy had refilled our cups 3 times before I noticed how long we'd been sitting there. I hadn't planned to say anything about Diane or Brent. I don't make a habit of telling strangers my business, but it came out anyway. Somewhere between the second cup and the check, and Glenn listened without jumping in, and Norma asked a couple of quiet questions that weren't nosy, just careful. The kind that tell you someone is actually paying attention to what you're saying. When I finished, Glenn set his mug down and said, "That kind of man usually has something to protect. Something he doesn't want anyone looking at too closely." I didn't know what he meant yet. I stored it away and didn't think about it too much. What I did think about, driving home that morning, was how long it had been since I'd sat across a table from people and just talked. Really talked without watching the clock or worrying about whether I was overstaying. A long time, that's the honest answer. A long time. I started joining Glenn and Norma most Saturdays after that. A few weeks in, their son Rodney showed up with his wife, Faye. Rodney managed a restaurant over in Capitol Hill. Faye taught third grade at an elementary school in Aurora. Easy people, the kind who make room for you without making a production of it. Then sometimes their grandkids would come by before weekend activities. Gail, who was 15 and already certain she was going to art school, and Stuart, who was 13 and had decided the most important skill a person could have was knowing every card game ever invented. The booth got loud and crowded on those mornings, and I started showing up 10 minutes early just to make sure there was enough room on our side of the partition. I want to be honest about what those Saturday mornings meant that year. I'm not someone who talks about that kind of thing easily. But the truth is, those breakfasts at Patty's were the thing keeping me from going completely inward, from turning into one of those men who retires and just disappears into their own house. I'd seen it happen to guys I knew. Good men who had nothing to organize their week around once the work stopped, and who quietly stopped leaving the house, stopped calling anyone, stopped being part of anything. I didn't want that. I just hadn't figured out how to prevent it until Glenn leaned over a booth partition and offered me a seat. Diane, meanwhile, sent me a birthday text in September. 3 words, "Happy birthday, Dad." I called back that afternoon, got voicemail, left a message. She didn't return it. Perry turned 8 in October. I mailed him a remote control car, the good kind, not the cheap plastic ones that break in a week. The kind I would have loved at that age. No acknowledgement came back, no text, no call, nothing. I kept the receipt for 60 days in case something had gotten lost in the mail. Then I threw it away. November came in cold that year. The kind of cold that shows up before you're ready for it. Gray skies and wind off the mountains that cuts right through whatever you're wearing. On a Tuesday morning, I walked out to the mailbox in my driveway and found a letter from Rocky Mountain Savings Bank. My name on the envelope. But when I opened it, the contents described a joint account I had never heard of. One that listed my name as co-signer on a $38,000 property collateral agreement dated 6 weeks earlier. I read it standing at the mailbox, then I went inside, made a full pot of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and read it 2 more times, my retirement account. My name, my signature, except I had never signed a single piece of paper for that bank. Not a form, not an application, not anything. Brent was a licensed real estate broker. He'd been talking up some commercial development deal on the west side of the city for most of that year. I'd heard pieces of it from Diane during better times, back when she still called. Big project, good upside, just needed the right financing structure. The financing apparently needed collateral that Brent didn't personally have. So he'd gone and found some. I sat at that kitchen table for a while. I thought about what most men would do in that situation. Get in the truck, drive over there, say everything they'd been holding back for 2 years, plus whatever extra came out once they were standing in the driveway. I didn't do any of that. I picked up my phone and called Glenn. He came over that same afternoon, sat across from me at the kitchen table, put on his reading glasses, and went through the bank letter line by line without saying anything. Glenn was the kind of man who reads slowly and carefully and didn't speak until he was ready. When he finished, he took his glasses off and set them on the table. "You need a real estate attorney," he said, "and until you have one, you don't touch anything. You don't call the bank, you don't call Diane, you don't call Brent." "Why not yet?" He tapped the letter. "Because right now you have one document. One document tells you something happened. It doesn't tell you the whole story. You want the whole story before you make a single move." That was the most useful thing anyone said to me that entire year. I found an attorney named Lorraine at a firm on 16th Street downtown. Small office on the 4th floor, every surface covered in folders, a whiteboard behind her desk dense with names and numbers and case references. She was direct and fast, asked 6 questions before I'd finished answering the first one. She read the bank letter, set it down, and looked at me. "Men who do something like this," she said, "almost never do it just once." She told me the same thing Glenn had. "Don't make contact, don't tip him off. Let's see what else is out there." Then she got to work. Over the next 6 weeks, with Lorraine running the legal side and Glenn reviewing the financial records with me on evenings at my kitchen table, we started pulling threads. What we found, piece by piece, was bigger than one forged signature. It was a pattern, and patterns, Lorraine told me, are what cases are made of. Brent had forged my signature on the $38,000 collateral agreement. That was the centerpiece. But while Lorraine was working through the paper trail on that, she came across 3 separate complaints already filed against Brent with the Colorado Division of Real Estate. 3 different clients, each one claiming he'd manipulated the commission structure on their transaction and quietly kept the difference. Each complaint filed separately over the previous 2 years. Each one that had gone nowhere on its own because a single complaint against a licensed broker doesn't move the needle much. 3 of them attached to a forgery case looked completely different. Lorraine filed everything, the forged signature documentation, the financial records, the 3 existing complaints with the Division of Real Estate, and forwarded the forgery matter separately to the county district attorney's office. Then she told me to go home, stay quiet, and wait. I went home. I didn't call Diane. I didn't drive past their house in Arvada. I didn't send Brent a single message. I didn't tell anyone outside of Lorraine and Glenn what I'd done or what was in motion. I just waited. Some nights that was harder than it sounds. There was one evening in December, about 3 weeks before Christmas, when I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe just the time of year, maybe just the quiet of the house. But I pulled out my wallet and took out the photo I kept folded behind my library card. It was from Perry's 4th birthday. He was sitting in the middle of the living room floor, surrounded by torn wrapping paper, holding up a toy fire truck with both hands, grinning so wide you could count his teeth. Karen had taken that picture. I wasn't even in the frame, but I'd carried it since the week she died, and I'd never taken it out. I sat there at the table, looking at it for a long time. Perry would be 8 now, almost 9. I didn't know if he still liked trucks or if he'd moved on to something else entirely. I didn't know what he looked like with another year on him. I didn't know what Diane had told him about why his grandfather wasn't around, whether she'd told him anything at all, or whether he'd just stopped asking. I put the photo back, finished the cold coffee, and went to bed. I don't usually talk about moments like that. But that one was real, and I think it belongs in this story. Christmas I spent at Glenn and Norma's house in Park Hill, a 2-story craftsman with white porch lights and a wreath on the front door that Norma had made herself from pine branches and red ribbon she'd saved from the year before. The whole family came. Rodney and Faye, Gail with a thick novel she kept disappearing behind between conversations. Stuart attempting once again to teach me Rummy 500 with the patience of someone who genuinely believed I'd get it eventually. Norma made a glazed ham, sweet potatoes, green bean casserole, homemade dinner rolls, and 2 pies. She packed my leftovers in a bag big enough to last most of the week and made me promise to eat the rolls before they went stale. After dinner, Glenn and I sat in the living room while the younger ones took over the TV in the other room. The house smelled like pine and cooked sugar and wood from the fireplace. Glenn asked how I was holding up. I told him the truth. Okay, most days, some nights not great. He nodded like that was exactly the right answer and didn't try to improve on it. Driving home through empty streets that night, I thought about Perry, about where he was, what the evening had looked like at their house, whether anyone had mentioned me, whether he'd asked. I wondered what story had been built around my absence over the past couple of years, whether I was too busy, too far, or just someone who didn't show up. I didn't let myself sit with those thoughts too long, but they were there and there wasn't much I could do about them except keep going. February. A Wednesday afternoon, gray sky, patches of old snow still frozen along the curbs from a storm 2 weeks before. I was in the garage going through a box of old hardware, bolts, brackets, hinges I'd saved from various jobs over the years when my phone rang. Lorraine. I wiped my hands on my jeans and picked up. She didn't waste time. The Colorado Division of Real Estate had completed their investigation. Brent's license had been suspended pending a formal revocation hearing, with full revocation expected based on the weight of evidence. The DA's office had opened a criminal file on the signature forgery. The commercial development deal, the one that had needed my retirement account as collateral, had collapsed entirely when the financing was pulled after the collateral was flagged as fraudulently obtained. Everything Brent had spent the better part of a year building had come down in about 90 days. Anything else I need to do? I asked. Nothing, Lorraine said. It's in the system, it'll run its course. I thanked her, hung up, and stood in the garage for a while without moving. The box of hardware was still on the workbench in front of me. A January cold draft was coming in under the side door I hadn't gotten around to weather stripping yet. I hadn't made a single accusation, hadn't raised my voice, hadn't shown up anywhere I wasn't supposed to be. I'd gathered the facts, put them in front of the right people, and stepped back. That was it. That was the whole thing. I picked up a handful of old bolts, sorted them by size, and put them in the right bins. Then I went inside and made dinner. It was a Saturday morning in April when Diane called. Not a text, an actual call. I saw her name on the screen and picked up on the second ring. She didn't say hello. She said, "Dad, I need to come see you." Her voice was different, quieter than I remembered it, like something had been let out of it that used to hold it up. "Come over," I said. "I'm home." She pulled up about an hour later. I watched from the front window as she sat in her car for a minute before getting out, just sitting there, hands on the wheel, looking at the house. Then she got out, walked up the front path, and I opened the door before she could knock. She looked like she hadn't slept properly in days. Pale, tired around the eyes, holding a manila folder against her chest with both arms crossed over it. She came in without saying anything, walked straight to the kitchen, and sat down at the table, didn't take her coat off. She set the folder on the table between us. It was a printout of public court records. Brent's name, my name. The forged signature, the DA case number, the Division of Real Estate Filing. She'd found it herself, worked through the public database on her own, printed every page, Dad. Her voice was just above a whisper. I didn't know. I know you didn't. The signature, your account, he used your name and I had no idea She stopped, put her hand flat on the table and held it there. Why didn't you tell me? When you found out, why didn't you call me right away? I thought about how to answer that, because if I'd called you, you would have had to choose. Between what I was saying and what he was saying, I didn't want to put you in that spot. I paused, I wanted you to find it yourself, so you'd know it was real. So nobody could tell you otherwise. She looked down at the folder for a long moment. Outside, I could hear the neighbor's dog barking a few houses down. A car going by. Normal Wednesday sounds happening around something that wasn't normal at all. He told me you were the problem, she said quietly. He said it a lot. That you were difficult, that you caused tension whenever you were around, that things were easier when you weren't there. She shook her head slowly, and I let myself believe it because it was easier than figuring out what was actually going on. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red at the edges. He's been out of the house for 3 weeks. I've been going through the finances, the accounts, all of it. Dad, there's so much I didn't know. So much he kept from me the whole time we were married. I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything useful I could add, and she didn't need me to. She just needed to say it out loud to someone who wasn't going to make it worse. After a while, she straightened up in the chair and wrapped both hands around the coffee mug I'd set in front of her. Tell me about them, she said. Who? The Harmons. Glenn and Norma. You mention them sometimes when you call. She glanced up. Who are they? So I told her. I told her about Patty's diner on Colfax, the orange vinyl stools, Sandy with the coffee pot. I told her about the morning every seat at the counter was taken and Glenn leaned over from the next booth and offered me a spot. I told her about the 2 hours we talked that first morning, about Norma's Christmas wreath and Glenn's reading glasses, and Stuart's ongoing and largely unsuccessful mission to teach me Rummy 500. I told her about what those Saturday mornings had been during the years when everything else went quiet. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she sat with it for a moment. I want to meet them, she said. Yeah, I want to thank them for being there when I wasn't. The first Saturday Diane came to Patty's. She drove separately and arrived a few minutes after me. I was already in the booth with Glenn and Norma when I saw her come through the door. She stopped just inside the entrance, scanning the room, and when she found us, she had that look people get when they're about to walk into something they can't quite prepare for. Norma didn't wait. She slid out of the booth, crossed the diner, and opened her arms before Diane had taken 3 steps toward us. You must be Diane, she said. We're so glad you're here. Come sit down. Sandy will bring you coffee. It took maybe 20 minutes for Diane to fully relax. You could see it happen gradually, the shoulders coming down, the careful look leaving her face. By the time the food came, Gail had pulled her into a conversation about graphic design and wasn't letting go. Gail was 16 and had already decided she was going to art school, and finding out that Diane actually worked as a graphic designer was, for Gail, roughly equivalent to finding out she was sitting next to a professional athlete. Stuart showed Diane the Rummy 500 rules. She picked it up in about 10 minutes, which I chose not to comment on. Diane sat across from me in the booth with both hands around her mug, watching everything going on around that table. How long have you been coming here? She asked. About 4 years. She nodded slowly, looked down at her coffee. I missed 4 years, Dad. Yeah, I'm sorry. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Left it there for a moment. You're here now, I said. That's the part that counts. The divorce took about 7 months. Messy the way those things always are. Lawyers, paperwork, arguments about assets. Brent making every step as difficult as he could manage on his way out. But Diane got through it. She and Perry moved into a rental about 12 minutes from my house. Close enough that I can be there fast if she needs anything. Perry was 11 by then. Quiet kid, watchful, the kind of boy who takes in more than he lets on. He didn't say a whole lot those first few weeks. He didn't need to. He was there, and that was enough to start with. A few Saturdays later, Diane brought him to Patty's for the first time. Perry walked in ahead of us, looked around the diner once, and went straight for the window seat like he'd been saving it. Ordered chocolate chip pancakes without opening the menu. Glenn shook his hand like one man shakes another man's hand, firm, straight, no condescension in it. Perry stood up a little straighter for it without realizing he was doing it. Norma asked him about school and actually remembered what he said, which impressed him the following week when she brought it up again. Stuart taught him Rummy 500. Gail informed him that he was folding his breakfast burrito completely wrong and demonstrated the correct method in detail, which Perry accepted with the seriousness the instruction apparently deserved. I'm teaching Perry chess now. Slowly, no rushing, letting him work the moves out on his own. Last week he beat me for the first time. He didn't celebrate or make a thing of it. He just looked up from the board with a very serious expression and said, "Good game, Grandpa." Then he started resetting the pieces for a rematch. I let him win that one too. I'm not going to tell him that. Saturday breakfast is a standing appointment now. It goes on the calendar the way Glenn and Norma have always put it on theirs. As something you don't move, don't reschedule, don't give away for something less important. I've been a builder my whole working life. The thing about construction is that everything depends on the foundation. You can have the best lumber, the best windows, the best roof, but if the foundation shifts, you feel it in every wall, every floor, every corner of the structure. It shows up slowly, then all at once. What Brent did over those years was work on the foundation. Quietly in ways that were hard to see until enough damage had been done. A comment here, a canceled visit there. 6 words on Father's Day from a phone that wasn't my daughter's. I wasn't the problem. It took 4 years and a county court filing to make that undeniable. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. The best decision I made wasn't hiring Lorraine. It wasn't the documentation or the DA referral or any of the legal work. The best decision I made was saying yes when a stranger offered me a seat at his table on a Tuesday morning at a diner on Colfax. Because the people who held things together while everything else was falling apart weren't the ones who were obligated to. They were just the ones who showed up. Week after week, booth at the window, coffee going, room made for whoever needed it. That's the only definition of family that's ever held up, in my experience. Everything else is just paperwork. If you've been patient, kept your dignity, and let the truth do the work, you were never the problem. You were just waiting for the right moment to be proven right. The man who builds in silence is always more dangerous than the man who argues in the driveway.